Bene, allora benvenuti a tutti. Mi sembra di capire che ci sia anche qualcuno in collegamento, se così è saluto anche coloro i quali non hanno trovato posto nella nostra sala Falcone Borsellino, ma questo testimonia anche l'interesse che l'evento di oggi evidentemente ha. Continuo in italiano, poi per la presentazione del professor Sachs e della professoressa Koundouri we will switch to English at due time. Allora, oggi siamo qui sostanzialmente per ascoltare due persone che hanno una grande influenza per il futuro dell'umanità in qualche modo, perché sono stati e sono, con la loro azione, ispiratori di tutto ciò che è il mondo della sostenibilità a livello delle Nazioni Unite. Voi tutti conoscete l'Agenda 2030 e sapete anche che agenda in latino vuol dire cose che devono essere fatte. Agenda meaning things to be done. E questo devono essere fatte entro un anno, che è il 2030, che si sta velocemente avvicinando senza che, diciamo, per larga parte del mondo il futuro e la traiettoria sia in linea con i risultati attesi. Oggi avremo anche un'anticipazione di quella che è il patto per il futuro. Il patto per il futuro è un documento recentissimamente adottato dalle Nazioni Unite che traccia le linee di quello che l'umanità dovrà fare per contrastare tutte le cose che sappiamo, il climate change, le ineguaglianze, la scolarizzazione per tutti. E quindi questo è un impegno a cui tutti noi, ognuno nel suo piccolo o nel suo grande, è chiamato ad operare. Questo è estremamente importante, quindi ne sono molto lieto di poter avere qui il professor Sachs e la professoressa Koundouri e anche la moglie del professor Sachs, Sonia, che è anch'ella una operatrice importante nella cooperazione internazionale. La mattinata si svolgerà secondo il programma che voi avete visto, con la moderazione del professor Tira, che tutti voi conoscete, che è il rettore che ha guidato questa università dal 2016 al 2022, proprio negli anni in cui sono stati lanciati gli obiettivi di sviluppo sostenibile e che ha dato un impulso importante a che l'Università di Brescia si sia sempre impegnata in questo settore. Per inciso, devo anche dire, and I would like to say it in English, that the University of Brescia is, I would say, very well ranked, I would say even top ranked among all the universities in the world as far as the action for SDGs are concerned, and in particular SDG number 3, which is health, and SDG number 10, which is to fight against inequalities. And this gives me really a high pride, because I'm proud to be part of this university. Adesso io lascerei la parola alla professoressa Pezzagno, che anche potrà dirvi qualche informazione circa il ruolo dell'Università di Brescia all'interno di una rete mondiale fondata, guardate un po' ancora, dal professor Sachs, che si chiama SDSN, Sustainable Development Solution Network, e a livello mondiale, e del tutto recentemente l'Università di Brescia è stata nominata la coordinatrice per tutte le università che afferiscono alla rete in Italia, quindi è la coordinatrice italiana. Prego Michelle.
Grazie. Grazie a tutti e buongiorno. Devo dire che per me è una grande emozione essere qui per una serie di motivi. Parlerò in italiano anch'io perché penso sia importante che il messaggio che vi porto arrivi forte e chiaro, prima di tutto al nostro territorio. Noi come università, quando eravamo sotto, c'era il professor Tira allora rettore, ma anche il professor Catelselli è stato protagonista, abbiamo da subito colto l'occasione e l'opportunità, ma anche l'importanza della visione olistica dell'Agenda 2030 e soprattutto l'importanza di comunicare l'Agenda 2030 non solo alla comunità scientifica, ma a tutta la società civile. È uno sforzo unanime quello che dobbiamo fare e dobbiamo lasciare indietro i protagonismi individuali se vogliamo affrontare seriamente i problemi che ci attendono. Cosa è stato fatto? Prima di tutto è stata fatta un'importante organizzazione di seminari, 17 seminari, che hanno presentato alla società civile e alla nostra comunità universitaria quali erano gli obiettivi di sviluppo sostenibile. Sono passati anni da questi seminari ed è il motivo per cui io sono particolarmente emozionata, perché le due persone che hanno fortemente voluto questi seminari sono l'attuale rettore, professor Castelli, e l'allora rettore, professor Maurizio Tira, ed entrambi sono in sala. L'impegno e la condivisione dell'impegno all'interno delle reti è un tema fondamentale e questo ci ha visto maturare la consapevolezza che da soli, anche come università, avremmo potuto fare poco. Ci siamo quindi impegnati all'interno delle reti che si occupano di sviluppo sostenibile, la rete delle università dello sviluppo sostenibile, ad esempio, ma dall'altra parte anche nel supportare attivamente occasioni formative, come ad esempio il dottorato nazionale Sviluppo Sostenibile e Cambiamenti Climatici, che non coordiniamo noi, ma che è coordinato dal IUS di Pavia, nel quale noi convintamente comunque supportiamo e gestiamo un curriculum che è quello di tecnologia e territorio. Perché vi evidenzio questi aspetti? Perché l'impegno è un impegno verso l'agenda da quando è stata creata da parte del nostro Ateneo. A valle degli incontri sugli obiettivi di sviluppo sostenibile di cui vi parlavo prima, cosa è successo? È stato fondato un centro di ricerca e documentazione sugli obiettivi dell'Agenda 2030. Io amo chiamare questo centro di ricerca un centro di ricerca a ombrello, perché 17 obiettivi da tenere insieme sono veramente tanti. Perché è importante l'esistenza di questo centro di ricerca a ombrello? Perché si vuole mantenere alta l'attenzione verso l'agenda, il nostro Ateneo è impegnato in questo, e dall'altra parte è molto importante il rispetto dei gruppi e dei saperi specialistici delle persone che sono impegnate sotto il profilo della ricerca all'interno della sostenibilità. Come facciamo a gestire questa importante opportunità da un lato e dall'altra parte a mantenere un profondo rispetto verso i saperi che ci sono nell'università? Beh, dobbiamo tenere le persone tutte intorno allo stesso tavolo, condividere l'importanza dell'obiettivo finale, che è l'obiettivo che ci siamo dati non solo al 2030, ma in alcuni casi alcuni obiettivi, sappiamo, alcuni target erano previsti prima e ci sono dei target previsti al 2050. Questo secondo me è un passaggio fondamentale, il superamento del protagonismo individuale, la condivisione del sapere non è assolutamente scontato. Dall'altra parte la consapevolezza che l'interdisciplinarietà è confronto ed è ricchezza. E questo è un altro passaggio non indifferente. All'interno delle attività del CRA 2030, questo centro di ricerca e documentazione che io dirigo da qualche anno, cosa viene fatto? Da un lato vengono organizzati eventi scientifici che presentano le attività di ricerca che vengono fatte dai nostri ricercatori, dall'altra parte si è cercato di portare avanti un'operazione di divulgazione scientifica sui target dell'Agenda 2030, dando visibilità alle attività di ricerca altamente specialistiche che vengono fatte dai ricercatori. Come lo facciamo? Lo facciamo in un modo un po' inusuale. Abbiamo creato un podcast che si chiama SDGs On Air, l'unico che esiste in Italia su questo argomento, che cerca di divulgare la ricerca, ma cerca anche di far capire alla società civile quali sono i problemi che stiamo cercando di affrontare. Recentemente cosa è successo? E vengo alla parte che secondo me è di maggior interesse per la giornata di oggi. Recentemente ci è stato chiesto di subentrare, cioè di prendere in carico la rete Sustainable Development Solution Network, quindi SDSN italiana. Questa rete è attiva già da parecchi anni e ha avuto l'impegno, le due istituzioni che la ospitavano erano la Fondazione Enrico Mattei, la FEM, e la LUIS. Siamo subentrati a loro, abbiamo fatto un cambio quindi, e chi è subentrato? Noi come Università degli Studi di Brescia, nella figura del CRA 2030 che io in questo momento dirigo, e il Politecnico di Torino, che è stato il promotore proprio della rete, è uno dei promotori ed è in questo momento il responsabile della rete per le università dello sviluppo sostenibile. E questo è un passaggio molto importante. In che cosa ci stiamo impegnando? Ci stiamo impegnando nell'agire attivamente non solo nel continuare a fare ricerca, ma nell'aiutare la società e le istituzioni e le imprese nel promuovere soluzioni, perché ricerca è una cosa, trasferimento tecnologico e innovazione sono i passaggi che ne conseguono, che sono fondamentali. In settembre abbiamo partecipato alla rete globale. La rete globale, tenete presente che ha circa 2000 istituzioni che sono coinvolte ed è diffusa in tutti i continenti del mondo ed è organizzata in sottoreti che lavorano su due livelli. Da un lato un livello di macro regione, noi abbiamo un SDSN Mediterraneo, i paesi del Mediterraneo che si confrontano sui loro problemi e cercano di trovare insieme soluzioni, e poi abbiamo un SDSN anche Europa, che ovviamente con cui noi ci dovremo confrontare come Italia per trovare soluzioni. Quindi il motivo per cui noi abbiamo proposto l'incontro di oggi è che mentre eravamo a New York proprio e partecipavamo proprio al pre-summit per il futuro organizzato dal professor Sachs, in quel momento, pochi giorni dopo, è stato siglato il patto per il futuro. Il patto del futuro che cosa fa? Rinnova l'impegno verso l'Agenda 2030 e introduce temi nuovi. Quindi abbiamo chiesto al professor Sachs di spiegarci il patto per il futuro e abbiamo chiesto alla professoressa Koundouri, e questo secondo passaggio per me è molto importante per noi come comunità accademica e per tutta la società civile, abbiamo chiesto alla professoressa Koundouri di spiegarci un pochino meglio che cosa vuol dire affrontare il tema della global education, perché dietro il nostro successo ci sono anche le generazioni future. Quindi è con immenso piacere che io do la parola al professor, lo fa il professor Castelli, scusatemi, però è con immenso piacere che io vi do il benvenuto qui e vi porto i miei migliori saluti. Vi porto anche i saluti dell'altro chair, la professoressa Patrizia Lombardi, che non può essere qui per motivi istituzionali, e anche dell'honorary chair, che anche lei non può essere qui, che è la dottoressa Sabina Ratti, senza la quale noi non avremmo potuto dare l'avvio a SDSN Italia. E voglio fare un ringraziamento a tutti quelli che hanno voluto e hanno dato una mano, contribuito all'organizzazione di questo evento. In modo particolare vorrei ringraziare il professor Sergio Vergalli, che ha contribuito ad avere qui i relatori che abbiamo oggi.
Perfetto, grazie. Grazie alla professoressa Pezzagno, che giustamente ha ringraziato anche il professor Vergalli. Io ringrazio anche il professor Trecroci, che è l'altro, pillar, come si chiama, delle attività in ambito di sostenibilità. Ringrazio anche Sua Eccellenza il prefetto Polichetti, che nell'impossibilità di essere presente ha comunque inviato in rappresentanza il viceprefetto vicario, la dottoressa Anna Chiti Batelli, e che ringrazio davvero. From now on we are going to switch to English, and I would like to invite Professor Sachs to the podium, and Professor Koundouri also, and last but not least Professor Maurizio Tira. They've already been somehow introduced to the audience, but let me say that Professor Sachs is the president of the UN Sustainable Development Solution Network and also the director of the Center for Sustainable Development at the Columbia University in New York, in addition on top of many other things. And Professor Phoebe Koundouri, she is the chair of the World Council of Environmental and Natural Resource Economists Association, and is also the chair of the SDN Global Climate Hub. Is that correct, Professor Koundouri?
Yes.
Okay, fine. And Professor Tira, most of you know him. He has been the rector from 2016 to 2022 of this university, and is also the president of our university foundation, and is also part of the board of the European University Association. So he has many caps, and he will moderate, he will be the chair of the session. Thank you very much, Maurizio. Thank you, Jeb. Thank you, Phoebe.
Buongiorno a tutte e tutti. So good morning everyone. Sono lieto e ringrazio il rettore e la professoressa Pezzagno di avermi chiesto di moderare questa sessione perché stimo molto i nostri due relatori. So I'm very happy to the rector and Professor Pezzagno to ask me to moderate you both, that you are outstanding professors and pillars in the sustainable development path towards 2030 and beyond. One thing we have to say about Jeff, he is alumnus of this university, because in 2018 he got an honorary master degree in economics from our university, thanks to the initiative about sustainable development goals that, as Michel said, was strongly conducted by Professor Castelli, at that time delegate of the rector. And a legacy of that initiative about the 17 goals was the research center that Michel is now leading. So it's a story that comes from 2017, and I'm very proud to have Jeff as one of the alumnus of our university. Jeff and Phoebe has already been speakers in Brescia in other occasions. A couple of years ago they made a conference online at the Futura Expo, one of the initiatives about sustainability run by the Chamber of Commerce of Brescia. The next edition will be next year in March. And that also was a kind of cooperation that we started with the Chamber of Commerce and other institutions in the town and the province to set up a strategy for sustainable development, at which Professor Trecroci already mentioned and Professor Pezzagno worked hardly. Let's see what will happen in the future. So the future, I think, is the main theme of today, because we have always to look at the future, even if we're getting old, or probably because we are getting old. And so it's better to look at the future. And the topics are challenging. The two speakers have already been briefly introduced by the rector, so I won't repeat it, also because they are very well known. But I think it would be very interesting to hear from their perspective what is the state of art of the Sustainable Development Goals, where we have already slightly more than 5 years to succeed, or partially, or I don't know, in some cases I think we are backwarding, so we are going back, not improving. But especially, as Michel mentioned, this pact for the future, what will it be? I went through it and rapidly, because it's quite long, and I wonder, but what are they speaking about? I mean, whom are they addressing? So they are calling for peace, a kind of ideal world that is the opposite of what we listen every day on the news. So there are so many of these statements from the United Nations, and not only United Nations, but now we really want to know what can we do. So a Sustainable Development Solution Network is solution network, so I think something that goes in the direction of sharing best practices for sustainability, but probably we have to change more radically our way of thinking. You know that in 2015 many things happened, not just the Sustainable Development Goals, but also the encyclical letter, Laudato Si, and the conference in Paris, the COP21. In the Pact for the Future, they are recalling the goal of the COP21, and they are promising that we give the resources to the poorest country for developing in a sustainable way. But so far, according to what I know, what was promised at that time, even before Paris, is only partially given to the developing countries. So there are so many things open, and the scenario where we are in, so with wars growing up, with threats, with not going where we are, what we will see in the future, very important election to come in many countries. May I mention, not just United States, because we know, but even in Georgia. I visited Georgia, not United States, Georgia in Europe, and in Georgia there will be the election 26th of October, and they are scared to be the next Ukraine. So there are so many threats in the world, and even compared to 2015. So I'm really happy, I think we all are really happy to listen from these two prominent speakers, what they think about the future. So the topic selected for Jeffrey Sachs is starting from the Global Pact for the Future, but I'm sure Jeff will say many more things. And for Phoebe, Education for Global Sustainability, as mentioned by Michelle. In principle, we decided to give you, let's say, half an hour for your speeches, so that we have plenty of time for question and answer, which I think will be very important from the audience. I'm sure everyone will be so much interested in posing questions to you. So, Jeff, the floor is yours. We should start with women, but now we have a gender balance, so if you don't mind, we start with Jeff. You don't mind. She doesn't mind. Please.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be back in Brescia, my alma mater, I can say, since 2018. So I'm very proud to be here and delighted to be with Phoebe, a close colleague on all of these issues. And thank you, Maurizio, for all that you do and for your leadership and for hosting us also together with Francesco and all of the colleagues. The future is complicated because the present is very complicated. Things are not going as we want them to go. And the number of challenges and crises seems only to multiply right now. And this is a paradox because at the same time, our tools for addressing challenges are greater than ever. We're in the midst of really a cornucopia of solutions. We're in the midst of breakthroughs in technology that really, truly are amazing, at least in my view. The Nobel Prizes in the last week were quite impressive in chemistry, in physics. They were about the artificial intelligence revolution. And the chemistry Nobel Prize, I think, is especially notable. It was won by a non-chemist or two non-chemists who were computer scientists. I don't know if they know any chemistry, but they solved one of the greatest challenges of modern chemistry that seemed almost unsolvable, and that was protein folding. That was the breakthrough of DeepMind that used artificial intelligence to solve a problem that was taking decades of the world's most sophisticated biochemists, who were often spending their whole career on understanding how a few proteins folded important proteins, insulin or others, and a whole career on trying to understand the chemistry. And then within a very short period of time, DeepMind applied deep neural networks and cracked the code. Not completely, but now there is an untold wealth of knowledge about protein folding that can be used for countless applications in drug development, which is the next challenge that DeepMind is taking on. And this won a Nobel Prize just a few years after its implementation. To my mind, that is really a good sign of what we could be accomplishing. And yet, we have a genocide going on in front of our eyes in Gaza and in this expanding war, and we seem incapable of doing anything. To go from the sublime of deep neural networks to the tragedy of our incapacity, I just read a moment ago that the United States announced that if Israel doesn't stop its attacks on the abuses in Gaza, in 1 month, the US may start curtailing the weapons. This is pathetic. Why a month? Well, that would put us well past the election. They don't want to do anything before the election. No matter how many people killed, no matter how many Israeli tanks roll into UN peacekeeper sites, no matter how many hospitals and schools and universities are bombed, no matter how many countries are attacked, no matter how many political assassinations, including assassinations of the counterparts that are engaged in the ceasefire negotiations, rather than have a ceasefire, kill the negotiator negotiating the ceasefire. And what do we have? We have a declaration at this point, well, in a month we may do something by the country that provides all the weapons and the armaments. This is our reality. What a world. The greatest breakthroughs imaginable in technology and the greatest barbarism in using those technologies at the same time, and an almost incapacity to address any issue honestly when it comes to collective action. So this is what we're facing. This is why there was a Summit of the Future last month at the UN. It was a creative call by the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, but it was also a kind of call of desperation, I would say. The UN isn't working. It's not, it works as an organization. I do find it still inspiring for me. I spend most of my time working for the UN on a volunteer basis. And I do it because I'm inspired by the idea of the nations of the world working together. And I like the fact that every September world leaders come and they speak and you can listen to them, but whether they're heard by others is another question. I like the idea that we have international organizations like the food-based organizations that Italy hosts, FAO and the World Food Program and IFAD, or that we have something as wonderful as the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. What a wonderful idea to bring science, education, and culture together in UNESCO. That's the one that the United States has walked out of 2 times to show, again, the high aspiration and the grim reality. So the call for a Summit of the Future was a call by the Secretary General to discuss the fact that on the near 80th anniversary of the UN, which will be next year, multilateralism is not working right now. And the institutions of the UN are not able to achieve their objectives. And even when we have votes, or decisions, I should say, by the International Court of Justice, they're just ignored. We had a decision in July that Israel's occupation of the Palestinian lands captured in June 1967 are illegal, and Israel needs to leave them. Very clear. That was followed by a vote of the UN General Assembly by an overwhelming margin. The count was roughly 120 in favor of the ICJ decision, 9 opposed, including Israel and the United States, and a handful of small island economies and a couple of other countries as well, and almost all of Europe abstaining, which is not a good show, abstaining from supporting a judgment of the International Court of Justice. How can one abstain from this? How can one even possibly oppose this, except to be an illegal rogue nation, which Israel is, and the United States is in its complicity with Israel? But the vote happened. It was an overwhelming majority. If you weighted the votes by the population of the countries voting, for example, giving India and China and Indonesia and so forth their weights, then the vote was roughly 90% of the world population voting to support the International Court of Justice, and about, or not 90%, 90% of those who voted yes or no, and 10% opposed. So overwhelming majority, completely ignored subsequently by the United States government, by the government of Israel, and by the way, very importantly, by our media in the United States, our mainstream media. We don't hear anything about any of this. So the world of normative decision-making, the UN decisions, the votes of the General Assembly, the decisions of the International Court of Justice, they exist in a certain realm, but they don't exist on the pages of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the MSNBC, the CNN, where people receive a great deal of their news. By the way, I don't appear anywhere in those places anymore. I used to. But if you try to say something that is not to the narrative of the US government, now you don't appear in those places. It's an interesting world for me because there is a lot of alternative media, so you're not really silenced, but you're silenced by the official narratives. And the official narratives don't try to answer challenges, they just ignore the other side. That's how everything works. We don't even have a question period like in the British Commons, for example, where the Prime Minister is at least asked by the opposition a question. When the President is asked a question, he waves and walks away. That's partly the problem of our President today also. I'm not sure what he hears and understands. We don't even know, because we don't hear from our President really almost at all. But we don't have an engaged debate. So all of this means that our institutions are not functioning well, and we need to understand this. We need to understand why, and we need to understand what might be done to change things. So let me give you a short personal view of those issues, and then discuss what was agreed in the Pact for the Future, and why, even though it's just words, why the words can still matter and what we should do about it. I think we are in a very difficult period because of the number of massive disruptions that we're facing that have overwhelmed our politics and overwhelmed our processes of cooperation. So there are some very important positive features of our world, and let me start with those. I mentioned technology. We're in a period of the fastest technological change in history, and these technologies are very powerful and they can provide a lot of good, but they're profoundly disruptive as well. So they're changing society, changing jobs, changing income distribution, and almost every powerful technology can be weaponized as well. So our intelligence services and militaries are all over all of these technologies. These are not civilian technologies per se. They are heavily militarized already. They're part of the security state as well as part of the civilian economy. But we have tools through the digital revolution that are extraordinarily powerful if we would use them for the good. A second positive development is that many parts of the world have had truly extraordinary economic advance in the last half century. And this is a major improvement of human well-being for a lot of the world. China was an impoverished country in 1980. It was impoverished for odd reasons, actually, because China, of course, had been, relatively speaking, a very rich civilization for most of the past 2,000 years. In fact, well ahead of the rest of the world for about 1,500 years. But then starting in the 1500s onward with the European ascent of dominance of the world, and then especially with the industrial age of the 19th century, China suffered enormous losses at the hands of Europe and at the hands of internal disarray and at the hands of its own neighbor, Japan. So from the beginning of the 19th century, Britain invaded China in 1839 in the First Opium War. Several wars followed. A massive civil war followed, the Taiping Rebellion, so-called, which may be the largest civil war in world history, with tens of millions dead. By the end of the 19th century, China was a greatly weakened country and dynasty, and Japan invaded and began to dominate increasing parts of China. And of course, in the 1930s, Japan fully invaded China. China went into civil war, and there were, after 1949, decades more of upheaval in China, so that by the mid-1970s, China was impoverished and unstable and in disarray after civil war, many other policy disasters like the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. Then China began an astounding recovery, guided by maybe the greatest economic reformer in history, if not, let's say, modern history, Deng Xiaoping, who put China on a path of tremendously rapid economic catch-up. And China became a high-income country and a very sophisticated, technologically sophisticated manufacturing economy, and life expectancy soared and living standards soared. This is a wonderful thing for 1.4 billion people, and it has energized economic development throughout Asia. And now India is on a course not quite so dramatic, but very positive, with a massive increase of standard of living, rising life expectancy, higher incomes, and following in China's wake in this progress. So, by the way, what do we say in the West about China's rise? We don't say congratulations or how wonderful. We say how terrible, you're a threat, you're an enemy. This is insane, by the way. Nothing short of this. This is a profoundly, perhaps deeply embedded kind of racism and ignorance, especially in the US scene, by the way. And it's terrible. It's going to get us all into further disaster. But before I get there, this rise of living standards is very real. In China, in India, throughout Southeast Asia, and in other parts of the world as well. And we sometimes view that as a threat, or we sometimes don't view it at all or don't understand it, but it's a very positive development about the world that could become a general development, because what China has accomplished, what India is now accomplishing, Africa could do the same in the next 40 years. There's nothing that blocks a dramatic breakthrough in living standards, in quality of education, in healthcare, and in other advances in Africa, if the global environment and the policies and politics would work out correctly. There's nothing intrinsic that blocks the same kind of development in today's still remaining poor parts of the world. So those are dramatic and positive developments. So what's wrong with this picture? Why aren't we just on a path of optimism and building well-being? Well, of course, there are massive failures of our institutional life, our cultural outlooks, our understanding, the way that our societies act. And the first one is geopolitical, which is that, and I'll start with the United States, which I regard as the most harmful of all countries in the world today, the most damaging, because the vision of the US leadership is to maintain power and dominance rather than to welcome the spread of well-being around the world. That may sound a little strange if your kids are in American schools or you work in the US and so forth. I know it's not comfortable to hear. I'm an American. I've been studying American society for half a century, and I've been living as an American for almost 70 years. It will be 70 years next month. There's something deeply wrong with American power and how it's deployed and the view of the world, and it's very dangerous. And the reason I single out the United States is that it's the most powerful country in the world, and so what it does has a very major effect on the rest of the world. Well, suffice it to say, the US has been in nonstop war almost my entire life, and we're now engaged in continuing war. We are engaged heavily in the war in Ukraine. We are engaged in the war in Gaza. We are preparing for war with China, God help us. And the American vision of the world is that China's progress is the greatest danger that America faces. This is a mind-boggling ignorance and self-referentialism that makes it impossible to have a peaceful world society. If you can't allow someone else to catch up, to overcome 150 years of imperialism, to overcome the wars that Britain, that Europe, that the United States, that Japan imposed on China, and say, welcome home to a normal, peaceful world, we have a serious problem. So we have multiple crises in the world that I attribute to great power politics, and I do not accept at all our standard Western narrative that this is caused by Putin or Xi Jinping or the Communist Party of China or Hamas or others. I view this as the United States and its allies trying to continue to sustain their dominance over the rest of the world in absolutely unfair and often very illegal and very violent ways. So this is the first problem. Geopolitics doesn't work. Maybe I'll just say, because I have running out of time, just a short note, all of these wars could be ended immediately because they have political causes. So the war in Ukraine would end the day that the President of the United States says, okay, we're not going to expand NATO to Ukraine. The day that that is said, the war is over, period. This is not a war of Russian aggression to take over land or to invade Europe. By no means. This is a war that came because for 30 years the US has pushed NATO eastward and Russia has said, stop coming to our borders. And we could not accept for one moment in 30 years any respect for the other side. And now we're pushing, and any day Biden could say to Schultz, give them the Taurus missiles, and Ukraine could bomb Moscow, and then we have a nuclear war. We're very close to this because we have a half-debilitated US president. We have a US and Europe mainstream media which tells absolute falsehoods every single day about what's going on. And we have a direct war between the US and Russia underway. In Gaza, the war would end today if the United States would say there will be a state of Palestine on the borders of the 4th of June, 1967, as in international law. And we will not veto that at the UN Security Council as we did 3 months ago. That would end the war. Israel would blow a gasket. What could it do? Every bit of armaments, all the finance comes from the United States. The war would end immediately. We don't have to have a war with China as long as we say that Taiwan is part of China, which is our agreed diplomacy, is historically accurate, and is the most prudent course we could possibly take in this world. But instead, the US is unilaterally arming Taiwan. Okay. I mention all of these things not to get us completely off track, but to explain that in a world in which we are provoking wars, how are we going to cooperate on climate change or on ending poverty or on fighting disease and so forth? I'll mention one other unpleasant fact just to get us started. We could discuss it. COVID almost surely came out of a US laboratory. We know the research, we know the funding, we know the NIH proposals, we know the US-China program, we know the cooperation between the University of North Carolina and the Wuhan Institute of Virology. We even know exactly the game plan because it was leaked in a proposal called the Diffuse proposal. We know that it was funded by other means, even though that proposal was turned down. So even COVID is the result of 30 years of biowarfare under Tony Fauci's leadership at NIH, because he was the one responsible in the National Institutes for Allergies and Infectious Disease of running the Defense Department program. So this is a problem. It's a mess. Everything you've heard about it is lies from the US government. Whether what I'm saying is true, I can only say it's 99% because only the CIA knows for sure. They have hidden every fact, but we have now a stream of whistleblowers and others who have provided a huge amount of the documentation, but the final bits are not known because the labs that did this work have never shown their work, their files, their emails, and nobody asked them any questions, because in the US you're not really allowed to ask these questions, no matter whether you're in Congress or any other place. So just a footnote on that. So our geopolitical environment is terrible. I'll give you another metric to cheer you up. I see everybody's faces, so cheer it up. What's the matter, Sonia? I know, but I need to just explain why we're in such a grim situation. Every country is supposed to have an SDG plan. Every country is supposed to present its plan to other countries in a process called the High-Level Political Forum. There are 193 UN member states, and 188 of them have done this, including Italy, of course. These are called voluntary national reviews. 5 countries have never had a voluntary national review. Haiti, South Sudan, Yemen, Myanmar, and the United States of America. Can you imagine? The US, the host of the United Nations, the host country, the largest economy in the world at market prices, never even tried to say, we are interested in the SDGs. So how much progress can you make if the lead country, the one that has the veto at the IMF and the World Bank, and that dominates the other institutions, doesn't even recognize these goals as a matter of national policy, which is true? And why is that? Well, 2 reasons. One, the only thing the US is really interested in at a governmental level is power. And second, the whole US system is designed to protect wealthy taxpayers from anybody asking for anything, including the poorest people in the world. So the insulation of the billionaires from the poorest people is the design of the US Constitution, I'm afraid. And it's working very effectively. The only thing the billionaires pay for is elections. So you can read the list of which billionaires are on Harris's side, which billionaires are on Trump's side. It's a pretty even balance. They don't care who wins because both of them are committed to keeping their taxes low. So it doesn't really matter. That's the game. So, given all of this, we don't have a functioning UN in the way that it should. It doesn't stop everything. The UN is 193 countries. I'm talking about one of them. It happens to be the largest funder of the UN. And if other countries try to fund the US says, no, you can't. You need our approval. So it's also got the veto. It's not interested in a strong UN. It's not interested in strong international institutions right now. It used to dominate them, but it can't dominate them. So it's out to weaken them rather than to make them effective. Now, most of the other 192 countries want this to change. That's why we have things like the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement, and the Pact for the Future, because there actually is a vast majority of the world that wants a better future. Because after all, only one country is seeking global hegemony in a delusional way. That's the US. No one else is. So everyone else would like the world more or less to work so that we don't ruin everything. It would, by the way, work if Europe would do its job. what Europe is doing is supporting the United States. If the United States says, go to war, Europe will go to war. If the United States says Putin invaded rather than we tried to expand NATO, everyone in Europe will say the same thing. If I say that to a European leader, they say, Jeff, it's really tough for us in Washington. Come on, this is Europe. This is the civilization that is 10 times older, 100 times more sophisticated, and shouldn't be repeating every lie. And yet, we don't hear a counterweight from Europe on almost any of this. Europe's following the US in bashing China, it's breaking relations with China, it's imposing tariffs on China, your prime minister was beckoned to the Oval Office so that Biden could tell her, get out of the Belt and Road program. And she came back and the next week got out of the Belt and Road program to show what a loyal ally she is. That's how it's working right now. That's not global cooperation. That's not effective right now. So this is really the biggest issue, is global cooperation and moving from an environment of war to one of peaceful cooperation. And it will happen if we don't blow ourselves up in the interim. So the biggest danger of all is that we keep hearing our politicians making the most reckless statement a politician can make, which is, don't let Putin bluff us. Don't worry about nuclear arms. If you ever stop worrying about nuclear weapons, you lost the entire narrative. You lost the entire script. Because this is by far the greatest risk that we face, that all of this spills over into some unbelievable disaster, and we're not far from it at all. We're not far from a nuclear war in the Middle East. We're not far from a nuclear war in Europe because of Ukraine. And nobody negotiates. Everyone just points how evil. Even your new High Representative for External Affairs, Kallas. She says we should defeat Russia, we should divide Russia into little pieces. Good luck, ladies and gentlemen. 6,000 nuclear warheads on their side. Don't try it, please. Not a good idea. So what happened last month? What happened is another, I'm going to finish now. What happened is another high-level declaration, like Mauricio said. A very good one, 56 action points, none of which will get done unless we change our attitude towards global cooperation, every one of which the US alone can veto. They require institutional changes. They require the United States not using its veto. And the US built in its veto all over the international system. Of course, it has a veto at the UN, but it has a veto at the IMF. It has a veto at the World Bank. And this is the basic issue. 5 areas, and I'm going to stop, so just 30 seconds. 1, to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by providing financing. 2nd, to achieve peace by moving to a geopolitics of peace rather than under the UN Charter. 3, to make the digital revolution work for all and to protect human rights and privacy in the context of the new digital revolution. 4th, to ensure a quality education, including a moral education, for young people around the world. And 5th, to reform the UN institutions themselves, starting with the UN Security Council. 56 points, you can find them online. They're impressive, by the way. The UN is very good at setting objectives. And I don't mean that in a derisory way or in a cynical way. it's incredible. Actually, most of the world agrees on the way forward, and what they come up with in the Paris Agreement or in the Sustainable Development Goals or in the Pact for the Future is really good. It's the kind of world you want for your children and grandchildren. It's not stupid, it's not naive, it's not wrong, it's not utopian. It's actually very practical. So the issue that Mauricio asked me, I don't have an answer to. How are we going to get it done? Except my answer is that we especially make sure that those who are clinging on to power in a reckless way start looking at well-being rather than power as their objective. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sachs. I mean, the picture you depicted is not very optimistic, so I think there will be tens of questions in the audience, especially from the youngest, and we will take them. But after the presentation of Phoebe Koundouri, otherwise I think we will stay for a few days discussing on what you said. So I think after your presentation, we will have a session of question and answer. So Phoebe, the floor is yours. Thank you.
So Jeff says nobody negotiates, and it's really a very difficult situation, because as you all understand, nothing will ever happen. The progress that we need to make in order to get away from the multi-crisis towards a sustainable future, a future that Jeff says that we agreed on, 163 states have signed UN Agenda 2030, have signed the SDGs. Most of the countries in the world have committed to this Pact for the Future during the Summit for the Future last month. So we need to achieve collaboration for peace. This is the first statement. What I'm gonna be talking about does not have the geopolitical dimension in. But I want to state at the beginning of what I'm gonna say that unless we get the geopolitical situation right, we are not going to survive, because it is impossible to get anything else done in a way that is impactful for our lives. I'm always excited to be in Italy. I've been working with the University of Brescia for quite some time. We had common projects. I have a very good friend, Professor Sergio Vergali, and his team. We worked on many papers. I am very proud to be invited here. Thank you, Rector, for inviting me, and thank you, the new SDSN, for inviting me here. We met in New York, and I think we can do great things. Great things with regards to our ability to showcase how science can mobilize the transition to sustainability and advocate for our right for this transition beyond and after a geopolitical situation that makes sense and is not completely nonsense and dangerous. So Jeff has said all of this, but let me quickly say that we have a multi-crisis. In addition to the very complicated geopolitical situation, we have socioeconomic crisis, we have low growth rates, inflationary pressures, shrinking fiscal spaces in the developed world, and in the developing world, 1/3 of the countries across the globe in the brink of default. So it's a very difficult economic situation coupled with the climate crisis, the destabilization of climate, transposed into extreme weather events, floods, forest fires, heat waves, all over the globe. Biodiversity collapse. This biodiversity is what we use, the ecosystems is what we use to produce and consume and survive. And all of this coupled with the population crisis. The population is aging in the developed world, is increasing immensely in the developing world, and increased inequalities between the global north and the global south, and also within countries, even in the developed world, especially in the developed world. In 2015, we transposed the Millennium Goals into the SDGs. The SDGs is not an environmental agenda. I'm looking at the students. There are 4 SDGs that are about sustainable management of the ecosystems, land use, marine use, the climate, and the water and sanitation, but this is about sustainable use of water. And then these are integrated with 8 SDGs that are about social sustainability, and another 4 SDGs that are about economic sustainability. So it's a socio-economic agenda that recognizes the important role of natural capital in sustaining over time across generations and between countries social welfare. And of course, SDG 17 is about collaboration. It's about collaboration for the goals, which is so difficult in such a geopolitical future. My team, which is heavily based on the collaboration with Jeff, with SDSN, we call it the European hub, which I'm going to talk to you about what kind of initiatives and projects we are and how we have and how we can collaborate. But it's also a big team of 200 researchers with projects in the 4 different university affiliations that I have. And we are working a lot on research and innovation acceleration, because it is very important to get the new ideas into the market in order to accelerate the transition. And then, of course, how you integrate all the results, the research results, the innovation results, technological innovation, social innovation, financial innovation, into the science policy interface, how you inform science in order to be efficiently designed and in order to allow space for the stakeholders to co-design the policies and their implementation and make them shareholders in this transition. We focus on SDG measurement, following the lead of Jeff's team, and ESG measurement and sustainable finance. We focus on sustainable pathways for climate neutrality and resilience, sustainable pathways for seas and oceans, sustainable pathways for land use and water, food, energy, and biodiversity nexus, and of course, innovation, acceleration, education, upskilling, and reskilling. There are many projects across the globe. We work in research projects in 120 countries, and we are always welcoming collaboration. Most of the projects are funded competitively, all of the projects are funded competitively, most of them by the European Commission, ERC, and Horizon, and many of them from international organizations beyond Europe. Now, again, Jeff referred to the SDGs, UN Agenda 2030, the climate agreement, all happening in 2015. And then the different regions of the world try to transpose these SDGs into detailed policy frameworks. Because in order to implement the SDGs, you need a policy framework. The SDGs is a very systems-based, science-based framework that gives you the right way to manage the interaction between nature, economy, and society. And it has 169 targets, and Jeff's team every year measures the performance of each and every country against these different targets and SDGs with about 250 to 300 KPIs. I'm going to come back to this and say why it is important to be able to measure. Then, as I said, the different regions of the world try to transpose this agenda into a policy framework in order to make it implementable. And Europe has done so as well. So late 2019, before announcing COVID in 2020, we announced the European Green Deal. I'm not going to go over the different policies of the European Green Deal, but we all know that it's a very systemic, detailed framework of laws and regulations and directives that allows you to implement the most important elements of the SDGs. I would say 80% of the SDGs are there as a framework, are there in the European Green Deal. We publish in Nature Climate Action a report that showcases that especially the SDGs that are about sustainable management of ecosystems and nature and sustainable decarbonization is very prominent in the European Green Deal. Where we are lacking are in the SDGs that are about social cohesion. And this is difficult and dangerous because without social cohesion, you cannot implement the huge transformation that is needed in order to get from where we are, the current multi-crisis, towards a sustainable future. But at least we have a very good framework. As I said, 80% of what we need is there. And there are many laws, the climate law, the Fit for 55, the EU taxonomy, the nature restoration law, Repower EU. There are many, and it's a data hectic and science hectic framework, and this is what we are going to discuss on how we are going to implement it. This is Jeff's teamwork and showcases how good we are in terms of implementing the SDGs, and we are not doing very well. Because if you see the lines there that indicate where it's going and where it should go in terms of the projections, it means that we have lots to do in order to get the SDGs right. Actually, if you want to have a prediction, that is common knowledge, of course, is that we are not going to implement the SDGs by 2030, but 2050 is doable. We can do it by 2050 if we focus on it. And of course, the colors that you see there, red means below 50% implementation, and orange means below 60% implementation. So it's definitely not good enough at global level. And you can see how much red you see on the ecosystems. Here we have the food systems, the climate system, the land use system, the marine use system. And the level of implementing the SDG, that is their sustainability level, is almost uniformly below 55%. It's worrisome. And of course, we have the Sustainable Report for Europe. This is us. This is our country. And as SDSN co-chair, SDSN Europe co-chair, I co-authored the report. But the mind behind this report is Guillaume Lafortune, who does amazing work. And here again, we showcase that there are huge challenges in Europe as well. In all 4 ecosystems, you can see SDG 2, food systems, climate system, marine system, land use systems, all red. and responsible consumption production, red as well. The rest, we are doing better. And for some, we are on track to achieving the goal. That is, where you get the arrow that is green and going up, it means that in 2030 you can achieve the goals. And of course, we can downscale to country level. This is Italy. We can discuss later. And you get information on each of the KPIs. It's quite detailed. So you know where you are performing well, you know where you are facing challenges, and if you use this as a basis for budget allocation and investment decisions, it's a good basis because you know where you need to invest more. You know where you need to streamline your financing. SDSN Europe has 19 networks in Europe, 598 members, and is led by 4 co-chairs and an incredible team of people helping the Secretariat that is located in Paris. Every year we have this Sustainable Development Report that I've indicated just now, and we also publish a report by the SDSN Senior Working Group on the European Green Deal, detailing financial and investment pathways for implementing the co-obligated policy framework of the European Green Deal. These reports come every year, the last 3 years, and we are also involved in European projects. These are European projects that my team is also involved, and because SDSN Europe is so powerful as a network to communicate the research results and to work in participatory approaches mode to co-design research implementation at the local level, SDSN Europe is becoming a very powerful partner in Horizon projects, in the research of Europe. And there are different projects on climate resilience, on information management for climate adaptation, a lot of projects on upskilling and reskilling and vocational training for all the skills and occupations that need to be created in order to implement the European Green Deal, and projects again on climate resilience in metropolitan regions. We work in 130 regions, cities, local authorities across Europe. And we have educational programs, and beyond that, each SDSN does its own work. For example, SDSN Greece downscaled the SDGs performance report to the regional level within Europe. This is very informative for making investment decisions and transformation decisions at regional level, local authority level. And we have even produced a tool that allows for the companies to understand how they perform against the SDGs and integrate this performance with their ESGs. ESGs is the environmental, social, governance criteria that it is now a legal obligation for big companies and companies at the stock market to report upon every year, 2024. So this is a tool that allows continuous monitoring and assessment of each and every company's value chains, the whole value chain, on how they perform against the ESGs and against the SDGs. And the SDGs are better than the ESGs. That's why they need to be integrated. Why are they better? Because they provide targets. You know where you want to go. So I can also come back to that. And now I will try to showcase to you also the Global Climate Hub, which of course started its work in Europe, but is also working in Asia and in Africa at the moment, in many countries. And the Global Climate Hub is a very holistic framework, the most holistic framework that exists, that details the optimal mixture of technologies, policies, and fiscal and financial instruments that you need in order to implement climate neutrality and climate resilience, and at the same time, take into account your need to implement all the SDGs, which are integrated if you're working in Europe with the European Green Deal. The methodology was published in Nature Sustainability, and you can read all about it. But first, let me quickly showcase the different aspects that need to be together, need to be integrated in order to have sensible policy advice. And in this framework, you can find myriad angles of collaboration and research projects and dissertation projects and summer schools and so on. So, let me go back to our measurement. We have a way to measure where we stand with regards to the SDGs. We know our performance. And we also have a policy framework we have agreed on. The SDGs, the whole of the world, their transposition into a policy framework, the European Green Deal, if you're working in Europe. So we know where we are, and we know where we want to go. So this hub is designing the pathways to move you from where you are to where you want to go. And we are saying here that in order to design these pathways, you need to make sure that you have a very systems-based approach, that you have the interdisciplinary systems, mathematical modeling, and at the same time, simultaneously, you have an intradisciplinary approach where you integrate the stakeholders in each and every step of the scientific solutions, and you allow them to be part of participatory living labs which co-design the solution between scientists, technology developers, and all other stakeholders, the politicians, the policymakers, the businesses, the financial institutions, the civil society. So we start from downscaling climate scenarios, we model the energy transition to climate neutrality, and the transport system transition to climate neutrality. Then we move to land use and marine use climate neutrality, how you make blue growth climate neutral. How do you make the land use climate neutral? Then the health systems, climate has a very big effect on health, both mental and physical, and then we integrate all of this into socioeconomic systems. And why we are doing this science-based modeling, every step of the way, the design of the model, the results of the models, the meaning of the models, the implementation of the models, we consult with the stakeholders, both in physical and virtual continuous communication. And we know that in order to really engage the stakeholders, we need education, we need the universities, we need upskilling and reskilling. Because true engagement means that they understand the problem, they understand the solutions, and they are able, have the capacity to co-design the solutions with the scientists, of course, and they feel confident, not vulnerable. They feel confident that they will be part of the labor force who will implement the SDGs and the European Green Deal. And they are not confident yet. And of course, my life's work is to create a digital twin between all the layers of the natural systems, the systems that I indicated already, integrated with socioeconomic systems. And this digital twin that does not exist We don't have digital twins that include human behavior, decision-making at the levels of socioeconomics. We only have the natural systems. These digital twins can actually provide policy advice that is implementable, that does not drive policymakers crazy because one tells them, do this in the sea, and somebody else says, do this in the land, and then at the coastal area, they get confused because they have not integrated the policies, they have not made them consistent. So for the climate and energy systems, very quickly here, we'll use different models. And these are a combination of optimization and simulation models. What is important is that at the end of the day, we can get, this is Europe and the Balkans, we can get the optimal sources of energy across Europe and the green corridors between countries that allow the implementation of the Fit for 55, which is a regulation that makes compulsory the reduction of CO2 emissions by 55% in 2030 compared to what we had in 1990. And not just the Fit for 55, but also climate neutrality by 2050. This is something that we want SDSN Italy to also be part of, because here we validate the results with all our partners. Then SDSN and Jeff are co-leading a consortium with IASA that is called FABLE, and it's about the sustainability of food systems. So the energy systems have to be integrated with the food systems. The energy systems need to be climate neutral and climate resilient, but the food systems need to do that as well. And at the same time, implement biodiversity goals and food security goals. And FABLE is a very elaborate network that does that it's a calculator. And at the end of the day, we lead the team for the Greek implementation, but there is a big number of countries that implement the FABLE calculator across the world. And at the end of the day, we have explicit pathways of what you need to do with regards to agriculture technology, with regards to your diet, with regards to your regulation for methane emissions, in order to get to food security, climate neutrality, and conserve biodiversity. And we do further work on FABLE, my team, in order to give more information, more detailed information, because it is really important to downscale at the local level, including sensor data in order to account heated trade-offs in FABLE. And we also merge the energy and land use models via water requirement models. So at the end of the day, we hope to have a very integrated way of designing these pathways that we offer the stakeholders and the policymakers. Yes? Microphone. Okay. I thought I have a louder than appropriate voice, but maybe not. Okay, microphone. And it's not just mitigation, it's also adaptation. We have models that showcase how you can design efficient, resilient systems and how you can hedge against extreme weather conditions. This is a model of what you should do after a forest fire in order to prevent a huge catastrophe in the next months that floods will be coming. And we do a cost-benefit analysis that identifies how much you will lose if you don't invest in flood-resilient infrastructure. And in doing all this, And this is a marine model as well that we have built in-house. What is the optimal mixture of technologies on a cost-minimizing approach for making marine and shipping markets efficient in implementing the climate neutrality goals? What kind of technologies you need, what kind of investment, what is the spatial distribution of that, when can it happen, IMO regulation, European regulation, when it should be implemented. We have a serious lack on that. So integrating all this and also integrating innovation. We incubate more than 500 startups in 3 different accelerators. One focus on climate neutral shipping, one focus on blue growth, especially in the Black Sea, and one focus on climate adaptation. Various technologies and innovations, technological, social, and financial, that will get you to that you need to incubate and accelerate in order to implement in the market, in order to facilitate the change, in order to empower the transition to sustainability. And of course, a very important element in all this is how these different pathways, the energy system pathway, the land use system pathway, the mobility system, the health system, how are they going to be financed and how they are going to protect the vulnerable. And of course, we have IAMs, the impact assessment models, that showcase how you can actually finance the transition you are integrating between the systems you have. One important element is to monetize ecosystems, is to monetize, be able to include ecosystem services in your cost-benefit analysis. The other important element is behavioral economics, how people behave, and this is what we integrate in our updated IAMs. And I'm not gonna show you reports, but I'm gonna say that there are applications. We have done applications in a general equilibrium framework that showcase that these transitions are doable. It is possible to implement all the European Green Deal, at least climate laws, and achieve positive growth rates, achieve increased employment, and achieve reduced inequality coefficients. What it is not possible is when you move in the global south, where you don't have the money, you don't have the fiscal space, and there we need a major restructuring of the global financial architecture to streamline finances to an SDG stimulus in these countries. And these finances need to be serious and sincere, which means they need to be long run, because SDGs are long run goals, and they need to be almost zero interest rate. So this needs to be happening already yesterday, and it needs to come with a public-private partnership in order to happen. Government money is not enough. And I'm closing by re-emphasizing the fact that you need to engage stakeholders, you need to give them the capacity to understand what you are talking about, and you need to make them shareholders in all the new projects of implementation of the SDGs. Making them shareholders is a long-run process, but not too long-run. In all of our applications, as I told you, we work in many countries. It doesn't take more than 2 years to engage them if you are serious about engaging them, if you are serious about making them stakeholders. The big issue is what we need as universities and educators to take into account. We've done an AI study, deep neural networks, that mapped all the policies of the European Green Deal, including not just the green policies, but also the industrial policy, the digital policy. And from that, we identify the skills and occupations that are needed to implement the European Green Deal. And then we went to the labor market today and asked, do we have these skills? Do we have these occupations? And the answer is that 85% of these skills and occupations are not there. So we universities need to revise our curricula to provide the education, the knowledge, the skills that are needed to implement the transition we all signed for. And if you go beyond Europe, the situation is even worse. So in COP, in the next COP in Baku, we are going to release the platform that allows the integration of all systems work in order to provide sensible policy decision. This platform will be continuously updated and completely open access so that everybody can use the data, which will be continuously updated, the models, the results of the models, and all the tools. The tool for transitioning companies, the visualization tools and digital twins that can be downscaled and understand the interaction between nature and social behavior. Everything will be fully available, and not only that, we will be providing training courses for its use. And of course, all we do within our labs as professors and students and the academic community needs to go out. I know that this is not our comfort zone, but this is something that Jeff's leadership has shown that it's the only way to have transformative impact, and we need transformative impact. So in SDSN, we have many engagements at the COP, at UN General Assembly, at the Climate Weeks, at G20, at the European Commission, and various other institutions that are crucial stakeholders in the design of the implementation. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much, Professor Koundouri, for your presentation. Inspiring and very exhaustive for what you're doing, and congratulations. I'm sure that the Italian branch will cooperate with you in these activities. Of course, I said I'm sure. So now it's time for a question. I have at least 40 minutes, even more, for questions to both speakers. You can ask questions in in Italian if you want, but better if you do it in English. The answer will be English anyway. So I don't know if there is a microphone to give to or they have to come here. Is there a microphone for questions? Well, if you have questions, in the meantime, you can come here.
Maybe could I make a comment?
Yes, you can.
Well, people are waiting for questions. Just to comment on Phoebe's superb work and excellent presentation. You'll see that the idea of the analysis in each case is there is a specific challenge. For example, how to go to a zero carbon energy system. And then the idea is look at the technical options, what could be engineered, how much do they cost, what is the time frame, and what should be done in order to achieve the goal by a certain period. So you can ask the question, what is the lowest cost way to create a zero emission energy system by the year 2050? And if you have all of the technology options and the places you could put the transmission lines and so on, you can calculate technically the solution. And that is the approach that Phoebe's championing in each area: land use, energy systems, marine conservation, and so on. What is the goal? What are the technological challenges? What do they cost? How could they be implemented? Our view is that this is the rational way to solve problems, which is to try to state what we're after, to then specify clearly how such objectives could be met, to analyze different options, and then to come up with a solution. It's what your car map or what your Google map does every time you want to go from A to B. You say, my destination's B, I have a path. If you have Waze or whatever program you use, it looks at the weights of the different paths. It talks about congestion, about costs. You do the same thing with a grid, and it's essentially the same kind of path analysis. So the underlying mathematics is quite similar, and the underlying structure is quite similar, and a lot of it is done on a geospatial grid the same way. The main point I wanted to mention is how different that is from normal politics. This is not how governments generally operate. They don't say, here is our goal, here is our timeline, here are our options, here is our path, here is our plan, here is our vote, here is our budget. So politics is not like that. I think it's right to say that our approach, I hope it's Brescia's approach also, is to try to upgrade politics. Because this is not wrong. This is, if I want to go from A to B, I would not listen to Donald Trump. I'd rather look at a Google map. And if he said, oh, but you don't want to go that way, you go my way, I'd say probably he has some interest because he has some store or golf course he wants to lead me to. Or he's an ignoramus, so he doesn't know where the hell to go, but he has to say something, and so forth. You wouldn't listen to a politician tell you how to get from A to B. But we don't hear our politicians exercising this kind of rationality. The problems, unfortunately, are too complicated for the normal, I'll give you this, you give me this, we'll vote, it's in the right direction. It doesn't solve these problems at a technical level. This is putting aside the geopolitics. It doesn't actually solve the problems to just have the normal way of trading off your interest and my interest, and you hire these people and I'll hire these people and we'll get on with it. It actually doesn't work. And I think the challenges today are highly technical and complex. And our world that we live in is incredibly technical and complex, and none of us can understand it. Only specialists can understand specific pieces of it. And it tends to work in certain areas. It works where there's a lot of private income that can be properly directed by a profit motive to make it work, because Netflix wants to sell movies to us, and that's a highly technical system that has to work. It works because the utilities know what they need to do and people want electricity. The airline system works quite well because politicians get on airplanes. If the politicians never got on airplanes, the airplanes would crash all the time, or they just wouldn't take off. So and these are highly technical systems, but we're not using the same methodology to solve the problems of climate, environment, war and peace, by the way, which are also susceptible to rational analysis, discussion, proof, evidence the same way, but we don't use any of that there. And the questions are why? And they're quite interesting, deep questions. Which systems work? Because we live in a very complex world with very successful systems, after all. It's amazing how many people move in a day, how many international financial transactions take place in a day, how your bank balances, where there's nothing but ciphers and bits, actually more or less work, and so on. But certain systems don't work at all and don't apply the same rationality. So I just wanted to emphasize that we're trying to put rationality where it is not used right now. It generally runs up against reasons why it's not being used. It's not being used because there's not a clear profit motive, or it actually runs against the profit motive in a strong way. There isn't a strong profit motive for the open oceans or for the atmosphere or other places, and you can't easily turn it into that, even though we like to think by putting on a tax or a tradable permit or so forth, we solve this, but we only solve little bits and pieces of a much more complex planning problem. But the other thing that is an aspect of this complexity is that when Phoebe showed you the map of Europe and an optimization that looks like a Google map, how are you going to put the grid on the map? That's 27 countries that have to agree. But it wasn't just for that, it's also the West Balkans, it's North Africa, it's the Middle East, so it's not even countries in Europe. Europe has made goals, but it doesn't have a European-wide plan. There's no European-wide plan. There's not even the idea of one. And if you say in Brussels, well, you need a plan, they laugh. Or if you say that to a senior executive in Europe, they say, well, not in my lifetime, it's not going to happen. Not because they object to it, but because nobody cares to think that it's possible politically, given all of the interests involved and so on. So, and finally, one more point. It requires regional cooperation that's above national level, and the time dimension is way beyond the normal time dimension of politics, because politicians are interested in whether they're in office next year or whether they win the next budget or whether they win the next election. They are not interested in 20 years or 30 years or 40 years. That's for somebody else. But these problems cannot be solved in 5 years or 3 years. And you can't even plan in that way. And the worst thing in my mind about the Paris Agreement operationally is that each country is supposed to put forward a 10-year plan every 5 years, what's called the nationally determined contribution. But if you plan ahead 10 years, you are not planning decarbonization. You're planning incrementalism, not decarbonization. And you may not even know it. I would say 150 governments don't even know what they're doing really, because they don't have a proper conceptual orientation of where they expect to be, or where they think they need to be, or where they understand they need to be in 2050, not in 2035. So all of this is to say that this highly technocratic approach is actually needed, but it is not how politics are done in general. And that is one of the biggest tensions. The other is power, and power in all its manifestations. But even the technical side really needs a different orientation. I doubt that the Italian government has these models in the Ministry of Environment or the Ministry of Finance or the Treasury or the Prime Minister's office. I doubt it. I'd like to be surprised, but I doubt that they use it. And I think that a graduate school class can do a better job than the national government in coming up with the plan. So part of my thought is get your graduate students to do it, email it to Rome, it'll help, truly. Email it to Brussels, email it to Washington. It's strange, a little weird, but it's not like the political institutions are ahead of your graduate students. Your graduate students are ahead of the institutions. Just give them the clear assignment, and they'll do a better job of how Italy should decarbonize than the Italian government will do. And then that can become the basis for action if we challenge the politicians. Well, show me your Google map. Well, I don't have one. Well, I have one, so you do mine until you have one. That is how I think we should operate.
Thank you, Jeff.
And Jeff's leadership here has another dimension he didn't mention, but I think it's important. It is not only the governments, it's us, the scientists as well. We have 300 models for one thing, we never agree, we drive them crazy. And Jeff said, okay, we're gonna put 200 institutions, 2,000 institutions across the world, working with the same framework that is complicated enough, but also simple enough to be used. And this is where is the call of action. Join us as universities of your SDSN Italy in order to get a robust backing of a common scientific Google map, as Jeff called it, a common scientific approach to developing and optimizing our pathways so that we have a unified voice that we can use and is loud enough to have some impact.
Well, there are many points. I would make tens of questions to you both, but I don't want to prevent the audience from having questions. But yes, please. Yeah, but not the rector that makes this job. You can introduce yourself while making the question, please.
Yeah.
Briefly.
Hello. Thanks for your speeches. I would like to, I'm a student of University and I would like to ask you one question. In your opinion, what is the main direction of development of green economy all around the world in 15 years? Will it be venture investments in green and sustainable startups or something else? Thank you.
We collect some questions, more than one. I have a question.
Please.
Can I? Thank you. So, because you made a picture that is a little bit dramatic, but you gave a lot of importance to geopolitics. But is not the world driven by economics and technology rather than politics? Yeah. This is my feeling. And what do you think about Draghi report? Draghi report seems to draw back the attention of European Union to competitiveness and growth, especially against United States and not against, yeah. Well, compared to United States and China. Is that a drawback? I mean, we go back to growth, where we spent 10 decades speaking about sustainable growth. There is a wording in the report that is funny. It says sustainable environment, but it's not the environment to be sustainable, it's the growth. So what do you think about that? Is it a drawback, or is it a new perspective, or is it necessary? And then I have other questions, but good, maybe later. More questions. Rector, please.
Hey. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Phoebe, for your speeches and talks, very inspiring. I'm referring to the 5 pillars of the Pact for the Future. Yeah. And I was thinking how I can give my little contributions. Probably not in the reform of the UN system, possibly to some extent to control technologies, but I was particularly interested to the fourth, which is empowering young and next generations. Well, it is a nice statement, but how to do so? I think it's not just to retire and to hand over to a younger rector, for instance. And I think that we should build a real trust between generations and to use the same language and to try to define what the common good is for the future. But maybe at the UN level they've made some other reflection, so I would like to expand a little bit on that and to elaborate. To me, it's a crucial point, since we are a middle-sized university, but still I feel responsible for more than 16,000 people, young people. How can I empower them?
Wonderful.
That is not only a question of competencies, I believe.
Thank you. One more question. I have a question for Phoebe, otherwise you feel alone or lost. Yes, you said you need to have a common framework, right? But science advanced by competing one against the other. So we can advance because we make it better, we find something better than others. So I agree with some solution must be shared, but also we need to work freely to find better solution and a little bit competing. In any case, universities are competing more than cooperating, you know. Yeah. What do you think about? So, Jeff.
First, on the main direction of global change, the ecological realities will shape the future in a fundamental way. If we put aside the geopolitical issues and the war and peace issues, which are dramatic, and talk about the economic and social dimensions, the ecological crises are deep and real and accelerating. And so they will not vanish. They're not a passing fad. They are not an unreality. The climate change has accelerated. The dysfunction of our ecosystems is widespread. The number of cities around the world in any given year facing serious issues of drought or flood or other climate-related manifestations is very large right now. Forest fires and other disasters, the displacements. And we have a lot more to come of this, because even if we did everything right in the next 30 years, the climate will continue to warm throughout this century. The manifestations of the change in climate will continue, and the likelihood of some very dramatic changes are real. We'd be extraordinarily lucky to escape dramatic changes. For example, multi-meter rises of the sea level are quite possible. Maybe they won't happen in this century. The issue is to what extent there's a disintegration of the West Antarctic ice sheet. This is not known what the time dimension is, but you could have actually an event, even an event, you know, over the course of weeks or months, in which suddenly there's a multi-meter rise of the sea level. And that would affect directly more than 1 billion people, and indirectly everybody. So that may already be, you know, built into the change. We don't know, but we're near thresholds of this sort that are dramatic. So my view is that we will be driven by this agenda, whether our current politics recognizes that or not. In the US, we have, of course, an awareness of climate change like any place. We just got hammered by 2 massive hurricanes. Generally, by the way, the states that are hit by these hurricanes are against climate action. It's one of the perversities. This is the Gulf of Mexico region that gets the hurricanes, but it's also the oil and gas producing region. And so the politicians tend to call climate change a hoax and then clean up after hurricane disasters every couple of years. It's a most perverse situation. So to my mind, this will guide us. For example, I think it was predictable 10 years ago that we would move to electric vehicles. The German auto industry resisted, more or less, until today. BMW, Mercedes, Benz, Volkswagen are dramatic laggards in the shift to electric vehicles. There was just a report this morning that their share of the Chinese market for automobiles has declined from 1/4 to about 14%. This is Europe's prosperity. So I would have told them 10 years ago, get on the case. But no, you can drag your feet. We're the world's best producers of internal combustion engines. What's there to worry about? So my advice on the future is understand that these ecological challenges are real and they're going to reshape energy, transport, organization of cities, and the way that we produce food, the way that we generally use nature. And societies and businesses that understand that are going to be in the lead, and they will generally make more money, and there will be anticipating the political changes ahead, even if they're not here now. I can't see how this could possibly go away and be less important in the future. It will only rise in importance. We just had, for example, BP announced that it's abandoning its target to reduce its production of hydrocarbons. That's an example. Yes, it may make sense over the next quarter or the next year. It's surely, maybe it's even rational from an extremely narrow point of view, although I doubt it. But it's the kind of thing that will not stand 10 years of reality in the next 10 years. There will be either the company will be taken over, it will be driven out of business, it will be nationalized. Something dramatic will happen to our oil sector because they not only are misbehaving, but they will never play the future role that they think they will, no matter how powerful the lobby, because the reality of climate disasters will be even more important. Related point, the digital transformations, which is more than digital, basically the arrival in an advanced digital information age, I think is an irresistible technological change as well. So we will have humanoid robots, we will have AI systems pervasively in our society and so forth, because these are breakthroughs at certainly comparable to any major technological breakthroughs of the last 200 years, and perhaps exceeding all of them. So thinking about that, what will our digital world look like? What will a heavily dematerialized economy look like? What will a work from anywhere economy look like? What will a world with Elon Musk's humanoid robots look like? He promises to come out with Optimus by next year. I kind of believe him that he's going to do this. And I think the third or fourth generation of these robots, we're going to each have them. They're going to be, they will have greeted us at the door, helped us find our seats, perhaps in 10 years given our lectures instead of us. But in any event, this will transform the world as well. Thinking about that clearly is a big, wonderful exercise for graduate students because you know this world better than your teachers, and thinking about its implications and how to guide that and what that will mean for the economy, I think is a very, very fertile area. So green and digital, I would say, as the two main words of how the world economy will be reshaped. On the question of is the world driven by economics or power, I think Thucydides probably said it best. He's quoting one of the speeches in the Peloponnesian War, that it's power, interest, and glory, or timos. That we don't know whether it's power or interest. They both are playing a role. And it is I think the problem with economics and interest is, by interest, it doesn't mean businesses necessarily, it means economic interest controlling power also. So it's the interaction of the two that shapes our world. In other words, the US quest for hegemony right now, which is very real, very misguided, very dangerous, very out of date, and probably going to change at some point because it's so unrealistic. But this idea that the US should lead the world, which is deeply embedded in US foreign policy in the last 60 years, partly reflected economic aims to control the resources of the Middle East, for example, and partly security aims, so that the US could dominate and determine who was in government in any part of the world. And those power aims partly reflected economic interests and partly just crazy power lust itself. So I'm giving a meandering answer to a very tough question, which is what really guides these global processes. And I would say that our governments do, and our governments, especially the major powers, reflect a mix of these interests in a very, very dangerous way. Okay, I won't say more about that. There's about 10 hours that we could discuss that point. But I think what we should be guided by is our shared explicit objectives rather than these hidden agendas or these vague agendas. So if we were guided by the goals that we've set rather than by whoever is driving US foreign policy, we would be a lot better off. In other words, it's trying to use the instruments of power for our collective interest. It's an old idea. The Greek idea of Aristotle in the Politics was that politics should be for the common interest. Machiavelli's idea was a little bit different, which is it should be for preserving the power of the prince. And Aristotle had it right, in my view, at least at a philosophical level. Government is the way that, in a shared way, we address shared interests, or that's how it should be. It is not to preserve the office of the prince. It is actually to meet our shared aspirations, and as clearly as we can state them, the better off we will be. What about Mario Draghi's report? Well, what he's reflecting on is Europe's geopolitical and economic vulnerability right now between two giants. So he's trying to make recommendations. What should Europe do in a world in which the US and China are in conflict and are in a dominant position in key areas? And he has a number of recommendations, many of which I find correct, to use public finance to bolster Europe's position. The main argument of Mario is strong integration is important. I agree with this. So I think a stronger Europe is correct, but a stronger Europe that does the right thing. Europe, to my mind, was on conceptually the right course when it was focused on the European Green Deal and sustainable development as its specialization. The SDGs are European goals, basically shared with the whole world. They emerged from European social democratic ideas and practice. They spread to the world. Europe had the lead on them. If you measure, as we do each year, how the Sustainable Development Goals are being achieved or not, Europe is by far the region of the world that is most in achievement of sustainable development. It may not feel that way right now, but the quality of life in Europe is the highest in the world by any objective standards. You work the least, you have the highest living standards, you have tremendous leisure, you have incredibly high productivity, high living standards, life expectancy, the highest internal peace until this war in Ukraine, and the highest measure of subjective well-being in the world. If you ask people how you feel about your lives, Europeans routinely had the highest estimation of their life quality in the whole world. That's good. That's Europe's comparative advantage. Not fighting a war with Russia, not remilitarizing, not breaking relations with China, not doing all the stupid things that a hegemonic power wants to do, that is the US. So Europe's biggest mistake, in my view, I don't know how I got on this, Draghi report, yes. Europe's biggest mistake was to put the headquarters of NATO and the European Union in the same city. Just put them in different places. And stop having a president of the European Commission who thinks it's a job promotion to become the Secretary General of NATO. That is a job demotion, not a job promotion. And so this is the big mistake of Europe. And what partly, so what is Draghi after? Stronger integration, more public finance, all to the good, strengthening sustainable development, all to the good. Yeah, I'm basically sympathetic. There are parts of it that I don't understand or agree with, including building the defense industries and all of this current rhetoric of Europe having to build its defense industry. It's much cheaper. Diplomacy is a lot cheaper than spending 5% of GDP on the military. And so this is the big mistake that that Europe is being led into. And by the way, when you spend all that money, it goes to US companies. That's the whole, that's half the idea. It's our industry that you're supposed to be spending your money on. So I think Mario is basically on the right track, but it was also pushed aside pretty quickly Well, it's too much money, everyone's got budget austerity, it's not worth doing, and so on. And I'm not a big fan of your commission lead right now, because it's all war all the time. And don't get me started, actually. Okay, I won't. I'll stop. Europe really needs to get back to diplomacy led by development rather than diplomacy led by war and peace. And then Europe could really have the primary position in the world in global diplomacy, because everyone in the world needs to figure out how to do sustainable development. Not everyone in the world needs to figure out how to go to war. So this is what I would really, really recommend. And then the final question on how to empower youth at a university. I think that there are three, in addition to rigorous training, good education, and all the things that are fundamental for a university, helping our students to understand the complexity of the world that we're in is absolutely important. And it may sound trite, but it's not generally part of the curriculum in a strange way. There's nothing automatic. If you get a PhD in economics at Columbia University, you will get your PhD knowing nothing about the world economy. I don't teach in it. It's completely, to me, the wrong way of doing things. You get a technical education in lots of model solving. You probably know not 5 facts about the world, even the relative GDPs or populations or the most primitive things that you should know to understand anything. And you have no sense of the history, the drama, the philosophical debates, the questions of well-being, purpose. You'll go through a 5-year PhD at Columbia, you'll never hear Sustainable Development Goals one moment mentioned. It's just not part of the curriculum. So I started a different field at Columbia called Sustainable Development. It was more or less an invention at the time. It was in 2005. We created a new PhD program. We created 8 new master's programs. We created a new major at the university. What was the content of sustainable development as opposed to my field that I was trained in, economics? Well, you had to learn earth sciences. You had to learn some engineering. Not to be an engineer, but you had to understand what a power grid is. You had to understand how our transport systems work. You had to understand some geopolitics and international politics. And my definition of the PhD was you have to be able to satisfy an advisor in the physical sciences and an advisor in the social sciences. So I didn't want to stipulate too precisely what your PhD is, but you had to have an advisor in economics and politics or in engineering and earth sciences. And both of them had to certify that you were literate at a professional level in those two very different kinds of approaches to the world. So this is the first thing I would say, is helping young people to understand the world that they are in and that they will be facing. And it's complex and it's amazingly interesting. And doing it at Brescia is a fantastic place because you can walk around in a short area and see 2,000 years of history before your eyes and understand long-term change, geopolitical change, technological change right before your eyes, where we can't do that very well in New York City. We don't have almost anything to look at before 1620, and we have very little to look at before 1800. So I mean that seriously. Starting with the own neighborhood is a phenomenal education. because you have all of history here within walking distance within your own gaze. Then understanding the world, which is not easy, by the way, but at least giving the tools so that for their future life they know different regions, the history, the background, the orientation, and so forth. I think every student, if possible, should spend a semester someplace in another continent, and that this is really important. It's important to make friends. It's important to see a different place, a different ethnicity, race, religion, culture at the background. And I think a university network should offer that routinely. And you know, a degree can now be done in so many creative ways that was not really possible before. And then the last part, I would say, is give the idea of improving the world. So what does that mean? Give the idea of how can we achieve goals that we've set. So this goal orientation. People ask me, what should I study to study sustainable development, or what should I plan to be professionally? And I say, anything you want. You can be in public health, you can be in medicine, you can be in economics, you can be in politics, you can be in engineering, you can be in earth sciences, you can be in psychology. Doesn't matter. But the point is that you understand that you're part of an interconnected body of knowledge, and that you have a moral responsibility to contribute to the public good. And giving an assignment, a capstone project, something practical, something local. How can agriculture be made more sustainable in the Po Valley? How can we ensure tomato sustainability? How can we, 1,000 questions that you could ask. By the way, grad students are the best resource in the world for actually getting the right answers too. They later turn into Nobel Prizes and other things, what comes out of graduate school work. So I think that it's really important to have some degree of problem solving, not only scientific research, but add that dimension as what any person blessed enough to have a great education in the world should also carry with them from the education. So those are my thoughts.
Maybe you can also react on this last question from the rector if you want.
So on the universities compete, well, the problems, as Jeff said, and I'm sure all of you know, are bigger than university micropolitics. They are much bigger. And the job of universities is to produce knowledge via research and also share knowledge via teaching. So it is important to understand that if you want to be relevant in this production of knowledge and science and technology, if you want to be relevant in your job in terms of empowering the youth with the knowledge to be able to understand and then contribute towards solution, you need to break down the silos. The silos within the universities, between the departments and the disciplines, as Jeff described. You want to be an economist? Great. But in order to solve for growth, in order to know how growth comes about, economic growth, you need to understand the natural systems. You need to understand technological production and the spread of technological innovation. You need to talk to the stakeholder analysts, the policy analysts. So break the silos within the universities and work together in an interdisciplinary mode, both for teaching and science. And then you don't need to compete between universities. You need to collaborate. And let me give you a successful example that Europe created. DG Research and Innovation is financing the collaboration between universities. I've been working in projects that are financed by DG Research and Innovation, Horizon projects. Before Horizon, it was FP7, FP6, FP5, FP4. I'm sure the older among us remember about this. And what was the result of that? Europe was financing the collaboration of the universities in order to produce solutions to the challenges of Europe. And it has been immensely successful because most of the models that you've seen in the suite of models that we are going to use for solving the climate change have been produced because of that funding and because of that collaboration. The ERC, which is our cutting edge structure, funds synergy grants. I'm actually the grantee of one of that, between university professors in order to produce the best possible solution. So it's not about competition. It's about collaboration. And it's about breaking the silos between departments, between universities, and even beyond that, between universities and technology developers, and even beyond that, universities and the out of university life. SDGs in universities, an SDSN guide, showcases how you can transform a university and put it in the center of creating the science, the technology, but also the interaction with the society and politics in order to provide sensible, science-based solutions. It's a very scientific transition. It's science hectic, it's data hectic, it's disciplinary hectic. Only through collaboration we can get there. It's hugely challenging. And if you have that collaboration, then you can seriously talk to Europe and the Commission. Because imagine if Southern Europe was able to showcase with evidence and science that there is no huge need to depend on natural gas from outside Europe, that we have the potential for solar, and Northern Europe for wind, and we have hydrogen potential. If we could articulate that, and if we could convince politicians, then I'm not so optimistic about our ability to actually implement an energy system that is Europe's secure, and it's also environmentally friendly, and it's also good for growth in the southern part of Europe. So instead of going to Central Europe and Northern Europe and asking money for our fiscal place, we could have a very important energy production that could support our fiscal investments. But we've never been able to articulate that and advocate for that because we didn't really have a collaboration between the science and the technologies developers to make the case for that. And if we had that, it would be so much easier to work with Africa, with Northern Africa, with the Middle East, and have a really holistic, integrated, cost-efficient, and maybe more sustainable energy system that we have today.
Thank you. We have to close, I guess. So, I'm sorry if there are other questions you really want to make. Maybe it will be some minutes outside. You know, at the end we close now, and then they can make the question afterwards. So I really thank you very much, Jeffrey Sachs and Phoebe Koundouri, for being here in Brescia, first of all, for their contributes. Very challenging, I would say, because we have not just talked about the Sustainable Development Goals, but we have opened a perspective on the geopolitical future, but also we have seen practical examples of good practices and projects you're running. I'm sure you will follow the activity of the Sustainable Development Solution Network of Italy, so Michelle will communicate with the community of our university what she will be doing in cooperation with the European, Mediterranean and worldwide network. So that will be a great challenge for our university to be in this process, and we are really very proud for that. And thank you for Jeff, that established this network a long time ago. Let me close with mentioning, you mentioned the earth sciences. There was a research center, something like that in Columbia University many years ago, and the city of Brescia was awarded in the 70s because it was the first city to implement a central heating system. So we received an award from Columbia, not we, I mean not myself, but our predecessors, the best practice in a kind of sustainable energy supply for the town. Now the system has developed, but at that time it was innovative. So our first contact in the city with Columbia University was winning that award, and we are also proud of that. So thank you again for coming, for listening, and thank you again, Jeff and Phoebe.